John DiFonzo. I'm the city engineer for the city of Cumberland, and I've been working for the city since 1975. I've been, I guess, the guy in charge since sometime in the 80s. I've had various titles, Director of Public Works, and a few others, but I kind of like city engineer because it's the most descriptive of all of them. So even though my official title is not that, that's what I use, and everybody knows me as the city engineer. And as part of that, one of the things that I'm involved in is being, I guess, the liaison or the coordinator of the local flood control project. I'm the contact that the Corps of Engineers has for the city. And just to make it clear, the Corps of Engineers actually built our local flood control project, and Cumberland had to agree to become the local sponsor for that project. All these federal projects need a local sponsor. The Mayor and City Council of Cumberland agreed to do that. Originally was not in a good financial condition to do that at the time it was being planned. So Cumberland actually became the local sponsor for the Ridgely flood control project also, so that it would be built. Cumberland was concerned that if Ridgely wouldn't participate, that it may not have gotten built, since they're right on the other side of the river in this location. And anyway, it went forward, and we've been dealing with the Corps of Engineers ever since, and actually enjoying the benefits of having the flood control project, which most of the time you don't really see the benefits of it, but occasionally we had a big flood, and then it becomes really crystal clear what it does for us. And one of the ones that you and I were just talking about a little bit ago was the 1996 floods, and that was, I think, that's the worst that I can recall, the use of the flood control. And it was actually, all of our designs, all of the documents and everything indicate that we should be able to survive something greater than a 500-year storm. However, you don't really know exactly what that is, and even though you have great confidence that that when it starts to flood, that it's going to give you protection. I do recall at the time that was happening, the flood was coming much faster, much more intense than we expected. I know the fire chief, Russ Livingood, was very, very concerned, and I remember he contacted me about what we might be able to do, and I said, Russ, you don't have to worry about it. Flood control project's going to handle everything for us. And I do recall him saying, John, I think you might be taking this one too lightly. Then we went up on the roof of this building, which is, you could overlook Wills Creek from here very easily. And when I walked out from the roof and looked down at Wills Creek, I started to get nervous because it was so full. I had never seen Wills Creek with that much water in it, and it was a little bit scary. We had then started to make contacts on what the flows actually were, and maybe try to figure out what the projections were for this area. And what we found is that the floods were so great that they washed out all the gauging stations between here and Hyman, so there was no way to get information. I was calling different agencies to get information from them, and it turned out they wanted to know what we were experiencing in Cumberland so that they could inform people downstream. And so we were able to provide information, but we weren't able to get any information. It was an interesting day, and it happened twice in 1996, which is really weird. But through the entire history of the flood control project, we've only had just a very, very minor number of times when the flood control project actually had to go into its alerts and stations had to be manned. It's only been, I think, 3 or 4 times, and 2 times were in 1996. 1996, the pumps were actually run too, and those are the only times that the pumps have ever had to been run. But the system has to be maintained. It's inspected regularly, and it has to be maintained. And we have a wonderful group of people who work on the flood control. The staff, they test it every month. They run a pump just for a short time, make sure it's working. They test all the valves. When maintenance is needed, they'll do the work to get it done, or have a contractor come in and do it. And there's a lot of that happening right now. This is 2016, and there's been a variety of things done at the pump stations. Actually, a lot of the electrical has been renewed over the last 4 years or 5 years. All of the pump stations have had new motor control centers put in. And then, you know, a lot of other things have been changed. So we try to keep it as modern as possible, even though they still are the same old pumps and the same old valves. Everything is still the same. And I will say it was very, very well built. But it is starting to show its age, and occasionally we have to do some maintenance. So that's where we are. And again, we do want to keep it going because it's so critical. You see it when you have a flood. It really becomes clear to everybody just how important a flood control project is. If we had not had it in '96, we would have experienced the same kind of devastation that they experienced in 1936, I believe. And I think '96 actually is the flood of record. It actually exceeded the 36 flood. So.
Explain just some other.
My recollection is that the cost of building the flood control project in the 50s was in excess of $50 million. And $50 million in the 50s was a huge amount of money. And that would clearly be a lot more money now. And I'm not sure what it would be, but I think it would be easily more than 10 times that amount, and possibly close to 20 times that amount. To build that system now would just be an enormous expense, because most of it was planned after the 36 flood. That's the act that actually caused the United States government to get involved in flood control, because of the 36 flood. And they started planning and designing and thinking where they would do these things, where there was a lot of damage and devastation. And then World War II came along, so pretty much everything came to a standstill. All the designs were done and everything, but they were at least started. But after the war, was done, then they got back into it, and then they started construction. So by the time they were able to start construction, it was in the 50s. It was probably very late 40s. Some of the designs and things were being finished up, and then through the 50s, the construction went, and it went for the whole 10 years through the 50s. Probably starting mostly in about 53, 54, and then through to almost 1960, maybe even still getting finished up in 1960. And it's been a wonderful asset for Cumberland. Without it, Cumberland would be in a floodplain, and a lot of the development in downtown Cumberland would not even be allowed to take place, and everybody in downtown Cumberland would have to have flood insurance. And fortunately, because of the flood control project and the fact that we were able to have our flood just a few years ago, had it certified that it would actually withstand a 100-year flood, which was actually a minor flood for our flood control. Our flood control can handle much more, but for certification, you only requires that you certify that it will pass a 100-year. And so all of our was all recertified, and everything is in order. And the people who live in Cumberland now can actually make an improvement on a building and go get a loan without having to purchase flood insurance, which is a really big deal. The same is true for Ridgely. We didn't actually certify the Ridgely side, but I think because of the work done on the Cumberland side, I believe FEMA looked at that and said, okay, well, if it's true on the Cumberland side, it's true on the Ridgely side too, because they're essentially the same design. And I believe they've accepted that, and accepted our certification to cover the Ridgely side also. So that's a pretty good deal. That saves people a lot. We are required to maintain the flood control project. The area within the bottom of the stream, the main stream bed, is actually considered the United States government's. So they don't hold us responsible for that. We do occasionally do some of the work for them. If it's minor work, the city staff can do it. We do it, and they pay us for that. Okay, so but they have the responsibility. But the vertical walls in the flood control project actually belong to Cumberland, and all the grass, all the levees, everything belongs to Cumberland. We just recently have had some changes in the way the federal government, the Corps of Engineers, classifies levees. not so much the change in the way they classify them, but the way they expect them to be maintained, and walls also. Along Mechanic Street, there is a series of houses that front Mechanic Street, and the rear of their yards go right up to the flood wall of the vertical part of Wills Creek. And many of them have trees in them. Well, you can't even hardly see that when you're on Mechanic Street. But those trees are not allowed within the easement of the flood control project. So coming this year, we're going to have to start removing them all. We've already started to remove a bunch of them. We removed the ones through the narrows, and now we're going to have to start working in the rear of people's houses. And there's some of those trees are very large. They must have been growing since the time the flood control was built, because they're huge. And we're going to have to take them all out and make sure we have clear passage for inspections and maintenance along the flood control wall. Most of the changes are a result of what happened in Louisiana with Katrina. And so there are a lot of the regulations, a lot of the ways we're inspected now, and the things that we're expected to do have been modified because of the flaws that were found through huge flooding at that time. And it's getting much stricter. I can tell you, I've been involved in flood control inspections probably since the late 70s, and the inspection procedure now is much more sophisticated, much more critical of what we do than it used to be. But we still have a good system, and I think we're doing our best to maintain it. Some of the things that we didn't realize were important to do, because nobody ever told us that, did get let go for a long time, and now we're trying to play catch up. But the Corps has been real good about working with us and guiding us through this process. So we're probably going to take a little bit of time to get caught up on engineering. Most of the engineering doesn't change, and a lot of things that were being done in the 30s and 40s, they have computers now that actually help you do the job, make it a little bit easier to do. But most of the basic stuff is the same. But when it comes to predicting storms and how much flow you can get out of a storm, how much rainfall can occur, it seems like as more time goes by, the more they find incidences of higher rainfalls, more severe storms. And so generally speaking, it is now pretty much accepted that what was like a 100-year or a 500-year storm 30 or 40 years ago may be somewhat less than that now, because it is possible to have more severe storms. So yeah, I agree with him on that.
Melting from the snow too.
The snow melt is really critical thing. You can a lot of the problems are additive. Snow melt along with a storm at the same time will obviously cause the problem. That's what caused many of the problems in 1936. And believe it or not, in January of 1996, it was the same kind of situation. The similarities between the two storms was just amazing. But we had a lot of flow. Wills Creek all the way up towards Hyman had flooding, some very severe flooding. So I'm not sure what that was like in 1936, but I know from the photographs I've seen, the channels were not open very good, and a lot of debris and stuff could get into those channels. I mean, including tanks, large tanks, and they would wash down the stream and hit a bridge pier and just get stuck there. That would obviously cause a hydraulic block, a little bit of a dam, and flow would back up behind it.
What's the impact further down the Potomac of the system here? Because they don't have the flood control down there, so what would happen?
Our project keeps us from getting flooded. It doesn't help other places downstream from flooding, but I don't think we hurt them any either. I will say Cumberland has also been very lucky that the Jennings-Randolph Lake has been built, so that they built a dam on the Potomac River, and we have seen the benefits of that. I think in '96 we would have had things much worse had that not been there. Now, fortunately for us, Wills Creek was hit really bad with the real high flows. At that same time, the Potomac wasn't. So the dam helped, but the other thing that helped is that area did not get the large storms that the area along Wills Creek did. So, your storm is somewhat unpredictable, and the intensity of it and the size of the area and just where the storm hits can have an effect on flooding. We have had floods in Cumberland because Cumberland's not 100% protected by this flood control project. We have had some flooding in Cumberland that hit on Haystack Mountain, hit like LaVale and Haystack Mountain. The flood control project, because it primarily deals with Wills Creek and the Potomac River, doesn't really have anything to do with Haystack Mountain. So what's happened is when high flows hit on that mountain and then they just gush down towards the west side, we get a lot of flow on Green Street and Fayette Street that are not have anything to do with flood control. There's no stream or storm around there, but there's just an enormous amount of flow. And yeah, I think it was 2000 we had a huge storm, and it caused a lot of flooding on the west side. Had nothing to do with the flood control project, but the flood control project actually picked that up. Once it got to the flood control project, it picked it up and carried it away without causing a lot more damage down by the river. But on its way to the flood control project, it devastated portions of Fayette Street and Green Street. The flood control project, most everybody who lives in Cumberland and thinks about the flood control project obviously thinks about Wills Creek, because it's a concrete channelized a stream that comes through town, and you can see the channel crystal clear, and it's much clearer and it flows much easily. So that's easy. They also know that we have pumps that pump flow into the streams. A lot of people, I'm amazed how many people think that we actually pump the volume of the Potomac River or the volume in Wills Creek, and of course that is not the case. The purpose of the pumps and the purpose of that underground piping system that had to be modified, stuff that you really can't see but is really a major part of the flood control project, are large conduit underground that takes stormwater and carry it to either Wills Creek or the Potomac River, and it can be, all of that flow can be diverted to a pump station and then pumped into the river. And the reason for that is because at high flows, the river would be higher than the system, higher than the town possibly, and water would then want to come backwards through the piping system. If it was just flowing into an open stream, it would be like a lake wanting to send the water back. So we divert the water to the suction side of the pump station and then pump it out to the river, so it's actually pumping out to the river in pressure. So the water that's pumped into the river isn't the river flow, it's river that's coming from the storm sewer systems and the other large conduit that comes through town, and then it's carrying it out into the Potomac, which could at that time be higher than portions of Cumberland. The major one, one of the major ones, is the dry run along Valley Road. That flow is picked up, and under high flow conditions, it carries a lot of flow. There is a conduit that runs along Valley Street that goes all the way out to Wills Creek, and of course it ends up going to the viaduct pump station, and then it can be pumped out into Wills Creek. Again, a number of valves exist along the flood control project. I think most people don't look at them and don't really pay much attention to them, but their purpose is to actually divert flow to the suction side of the pump so that it can be pumped out under high flow conditions. And that's how it works. And again, there is a large portion of underground conduit, very large conduit, that carries flow, storm flow through the town that most people don't even think about because it's not visible. It's definitely not visible, but it's huge, and it was probably the major portions of the construction of the flood control project. All right, Andrew. A little bit ago, you mentioned about what's underground, and obviously there is a lot of conduit and pipe underground that I was talking about. But an example of how things are underground or what you don't see are the pump stations. We have 3 pump stations, and here's a plan. It's a view of the pump station, and this portion right in here, and you can see it's where the brick walls are, and then there's the 3 large pumps. Those are all you really see on this. This is the Mill Race pump station, which is down by the C&O Canal. That's all you see, but underneath there are structures, very large structure underneath where the flows actually come in and go out, and then they end up going under the railroad tracks and out to another one, which again, all you see are the valves at the top on that. There's 3 valves. If you're walking on the towpath, you can see those valves, but underneath there are large sluice gates and large conduit to carry the water to the Potomac River. So this is the mill race. Those two sheets are the mill race, and each of the pump stations is like that. What's underneath, what you see is only this little part where the bricks are shown, but the pumps go well into the ground, and all the piping and everything that comes into it is actually where there are massive concrete and structures that carry the flows. This is the Ridgely one, and this one is the viaduct. This is the one up by the viaduct right off Mechanic Street. And this is right along, the other two are at the Potomac, and this one's right along Wills Creek. Again, the buildings are visible on top, this is all you see, but what's underground and what carries the flows is very massive concrete and structure that's really important. So I guess that fits.